Alright, what's up, everybody? Welcome to our second episode of Table Talks. I am Fox, and joining me with me always is Corruption Points. How you doing, buddy?
Hi, hey everybody. Good to see you all.
Alright, so we got a pretty big topic today. We're trying something a little different. We're gonna be this is gonna be more of a personal stuff. I mean, normally we have the visual aid and we try to get some key points, but we're gonna just kind of sit back and relax and discuss about GMing today. So what have you done any gaming this weekend?
I have. I played World of Darkness this weekend.
Was that the campaign where you're playing as yourself?
That is the campaign where I'm playing as myself.
Did you get bored playing as yourself?
Not yet, although I am running into some pitfalls.
Right. All right. Well, we'll probably discuss that a bit later. I had my first game with Team England, and that was pretty fun. In fact, uh, I'll talk about that later. Hopefully, this thing that I set up worked because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But yeah, and then I had my second game with Team Hammer, which is your party, which you didn't show up to, Christian.
Oh, excuse me.
Excuse you for being a good student. All right, so let's get on to it. So our first episode we talked a bit about starting for just players in general. So at this point we're assuming you have your group of friends who are playing. You got your rule books, you got your stuff, you got your dice. So we're going to be talking a bit about GMing today, specifically first time GMing, because I know a lot of people are nervous. It's kind of a nervous thing to do first time you do it. I mean, some people are just naturally they like being kind of the center of attention, kind of having the focus all on them, performing and stuff like that. But for others, it doesn't come quite naturally. So hopefully today we'll be able to give you some tips on helping that. So first topic, I guess, is writing your own story versus using campaign books, corruption points. What do you have to say?
So listen, I know I've been doing this forever, and it's very much easy for me, but I don't think that campaign books are always a go-to. I think they're a great source. I think they're very, very useful for players or GMs rather that have never ever GM'd before. But for anyone with any experience, or if you have any experience with storytelling in general, it is a very, very rigid campaign 90% of the time. And since these games are very much about players doing whatever they want to do, whatever they're going to do, often not in the leagues of what you've planned, it's very hard to sort of adapt to that if you've never played a game before, if you're not used to that improv, and all of a sudden they're off the rails of the only resource you have. And that's very, very hard to come to terms with at the front. It's very hard to find a resource book that not only you can make your own story with, expand upon later if you'd like to use it, but be able to adapt with while you're playing it. Again, for people that are just starting the game, I think it's really, really cool to start with a campaign book just to see if you like the system or to see if you like the aspects of running a game. But it's not always my go-to. I think for a lot of people, it's the instant thing you should do is pick up a free-to-play or a campaign guide. But I don't think it's always the right answer.
Right, and generally when you buy these books, these rule books, they come with a little campaign that you can do in a session or two with you and your friends. That's usually a good first step, and some campaign books are pretty good. I mean, I know I talk a lot of crap about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Third Edition, but the adventure in here, oh yeah, since I guess there's no potential spoiler alerts, I can show you the pictures of the dudes you were looking for. That was Gregor Pearson. He was the demon dude, by the way. But yeah, honestly, Fantasy Flight, Fantasy Flight has written better lore for Warhammer Fantasy than I think Games Workshop has in the past forever. So I think there are some games. It depends. Some of them are pretty good, but for beginners, it's not a bad place to start. But at the same time, it's all about, I guess, the GM's confidence. Because sometimes it's nice just to have those encounters where it's like, okay, you encounter some enemies, this is what's going to happen, and then you kind of just let you roll some dice and you kind of figure out who it is
So
and
that's
what's
the
going on.
thing. It really is a matter of the campaign books are great for GMs that don't know what they're doing yet or don't know what they want their story to be. It's very contained. It's very it's all inclusive, right? And it's great for GMs that are just starting and just realizing what they want to play and how they want to play it. But I think that it will be much more beneficial to GMs, especially in the long term, to start with their own thing.
Right. Okay, and it's two sides of the coin. Again, GMing is such a personal preference thing. I think when we did our campaign or our little adventure last week, I think you pointed out that I'm a bit of a different GM than you. And I mean,
Yeah, that's true.
everyone's going to be a little bit different. But personally, on the topic, I think it depends on the game. I think that usually the campaign books on the back are good to roll some dice, but honestly, writing your own story is where it's at, and you should probably start getting used to it as soon as possible. DM, GM, storyteller, title of your choice. I honestly prefer GM just because it's just a more
It's a catch-all.
yeah, it's a catch-all because a DM is just a type of GM, just in Dungeons and Dragons. You are not a special snowflake. All right, so got that out of the way. So we'll agree you should just start writing as soon as possible because it's something you should probably get used to in the future. And if you're a writer, it's glorious.
Right, yeah. And half the fun of these games, of any RPG, it doesn't matter what you're playing, is the fact that it's a collaborative story, right? Tabletop gaming is collaborative storytelling. It's not so much about writing down a book and having it read to everybody and having them interact with it. It's more about making your story with your players while you're playing. And again, that comes back to I think that writing your own story and having it evolve organically and grow naturally is better than trying to shoehorn it into a book that have already told you what you're supposed to be doing and where the players are supposed to be going. And that's really what makes this hobby the best hobby in the universe, is because everyone gets their own piece of the story.
Right. Okay. So well said on that. So moving on, we're going to be talking about PCs. So first-time GMs, do you think it's kind of important that they kind of stand over the shoulder of their PCs when they're rolling their characters?
It's tough, you know. There are a lot of different kinds of problem PCs. You know what I mean? And there are a lot of different kinds of ways to play PCs. I think that it all comes down to character play and character building at the earliest stages of the game. When you're deciding what the party composition is going to be, and if you're deciding what your play style is going to be like, and you're deciding what the party will enjoy the most, it's really important to allow freedom, but make sure you don't get overwhelmed.
Right. Personally, I've never actually kind of stood over the shoulder. I mean, I've always asked people what they're doing. I inform them what's already in their team because even if still they've never done pen and paper, they've played video games. They played World of Warcraft or something, and so they're like, oh, do we have someone who's like kind of like a sword and shield warrior? And I'm like, yeah. So it's like, okay, I'll be like a thief or an archer or a wizard or something like that. You know what I mean? So they kind of understand that there needs to be a balance. I think the most difficult thing with discussing, especially with new time PCs, is discussing a charisma stat. I mean, I think Fallout is the only game, and I actually think I was having this conversation with someone on Skype last night, how I think Fallout was really the only game that has heavily used charisma next to, of course, Neverwinter Nights, but a lot of people have played Fallout, but I remember I barely put any skills in combat. I was like a doctor. I was like a really charismatic doctor, and I took all the charisma perks, and I managed to get out of 90% of situations without firing a single shot. And I think kind of explaining that to players is the interesting thing, because otherwise everyone's going to want to play some sort of a combat character. But again, for D&D and stuff like that, everyone's a combat character. Sorry, go ahead.
That comes down to GM understanding what's more important, the role or the role, right? Charisma is an awesome stat, and it helps you roll your dice. It helps you realize what you're trying to say, and it helps you give a tangible mechanical device to tell you whether or not you're speaking correctly. But charisma, and much like other things, I think it's very often either heavily used like a crutch, or completely disregarded, and I think there needs to be a nice middle ground in between that. So let me explain what I mean. If you have a character with very low charisma, we're saying like 12 or 14, and they give the world's greatest speech about why these two armies shouldn't be fighting each other. And you say, all right, roll your charisma, and you roll very, very low, and your modifier is very low, and your score is very low. You'll say, well, your speech was amazing, but by the numbers, and it kind of disempowers the player, ruins the moment. On the other hand, can have a player whose charisma is 18, 20, 22, speaking D&D terms, or very high otherwise, and they have the world's worst speech, right? It's just they're talking about people groups and how like the right thing to do is doing the right thing and all these awful like tropes and misery, but they rolled really high, so you have to give it to them. It's rough. It becomes a very strange middle ground.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because this is actually something I personally do as a GM DM. But I've always made when somebody makes a charisma check or an intimidation or a persuasion check, something like that, in whatever game, I always have to say, "What are you telling him?" Because I also think it's a role playing stat. Personally, to me, charisma is a role playing stat. And honestly, if they did make the world's greatest speech, I'd maybe give them a buff to it. You know what I mean? I like to reward great role playing. And I mean, obviously, I haven't been the hugest D&D player of all time, but I've played a lot of games where charisma and fellowship or any other stat, I allow it to be a role playing tool. And people that like to role play, I make sure that if they can role play well, they they get possibly a couple numbers switched around just because I like to do that as a GM's discretion. Just kind of like if a person wants to play a warrior, they like to be tactical. They might be like the Warhammer player. Like if I come at the flank or something like that and all that. I think I don't even know where I was going with this. Corruption points. Where was I going with this?
Well, I think you're making a good point. I'd like to ask you a question.
Yes.
Would you supplant various stat scores in the place of other stat scores to help out role playing? For example, if you have a fighter and he wants to make a diplomacy check, but his charisma score is very, very low, would you then allow him to use strength instead? It's sort of an intimidating diplomacy
Yes,
check.
yeah, I would say, yeah, that would be the case if because like I said, the player role plays it. If he was like, oh, we should be friends and stuff like that, I wouldn't give him the modifier. But a clever role player, I would say, it's like, listen, you're gonna help us out, or this axe is gonna be in your spine. You know what I mean? Then I
Yeah.
would allow him to do it, kind of thing, because that again, it's GM discretion. That's kind of an example, I guess, how we can be totally different, but at the same time, there are little things that you can do as a GM.
And let me segue that into our major point. It is when you're being a GM, it is very much about making the game run. It's not so much about adhering to everything that there is to adhere to, which a lot of people get bogged down in the rules. Like when people say, "I want to start being a GM," they think that means I have to memorize every rule. I have to know what's going on at all times. If the game stops for any reason, I've failed. And I don't think that's entirely true, especially when you're starting out. A lot of it has to do with making the game go, making sure that your players are having fun, and that's the most important thing.
That is absolutely correct. So, what I think negotiating with players, especially kind of early on and stuff like that, if you're a new player, yep, bogged down with the rules, people are flipping through rule books. Flipping through rule books isn't fun. If you just can't think of it off the top of your head, look for a minute. If you can't find it, come up with a compromise.
Right. Come back to it, learn that rule later, but stopping your game so you can find exactly what the wording is,
Hmm.
it's kind of rough.
Yep, like for example in Team England's game, the final resolution, they both were combat heavy characters and they had high parry, and the enemies they only had like a D6, so they had to roll sixes in order to hurt them, and they just couldn't be touched. And I actually kind of wonder if I messed up the combat rules. I didn't want to bog down the game, so I just said, well, from my memory, it's they have to roll their equal or higher to their parry skill in order to hit. So we'll just go with that for now.
So, yeah, the DM does not have to be the mastermind. It really is, the players should really know what their rules are, and if they don't, you should just keep the game moving. It's a matter of not stopping the immersion, not stopping the experience to find out what's going on. Just move the game forward at that point. One of my favorite things to do, especially when I'm figuring out a new book, is using post-its. This sounds silly and like very, very like common sense, but I tab out every single page that I think I'll be using all the time, just so I know where they are and I can get to them. My Dark Heresy was the Psychic Powers page. For D&D 4th Edition, it was the various states of dazed, stunned, confused, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the real difference between a video game and a tabletop. You're playing World of Warcraft and you're playing Warsong Gulch and you're capturing the flag. You're about to capture the flag and someone attacks you and you throw on your paladin bubble and you realize it would drop. You're just like, oh shit, I didn't know that. You know what I mean? The game's rules are just kind of set in, and then we can kind of bend it just to make sure the game's more enjoyable. Because you're sitting down, you're playing with some friends. It's not worth getting mad or bogged down into the rules. Have fun.
Absolutely. Having fun is literally what the only thing you have to do, and making sure your players have fun is the only thing you have to do.
And if they're your friends, if they're your actual friends and you're nervous about it and stuff like that, they're not going to give you a hard time. They shouldn't give you a hard time. If they're giving you a hard time, you should probably make new friends.
That brings us to our next point, right?
Yep.
Just do it.
Yep. Yeah. A lot of first time GMs, when I bet half the questions are like, I'm nervous to be a GM. What do? You know?
I'm nervous that my friends will make fun of me. I'm nervous that it won't be good enough. I'm nervous about all these things, right? Just do it. Just go ahead and do it. If your friends are actually your friends, they will not give you a hard time. If you're the GM, that means no one else wanted to do it. Who's going to make fun of a resource that they have?
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like the only I think the only time that I think you can mess up is when perhaps you overshoot things. I think undershooting isn't so bad, like as far as like enemies and stuff like that. If they're bogged down and their players are just getting killed just from sheer numbers and stuff like that, I mean that's not your fault though. That's just kind of whatever. But you can also pull out anything out of your out of your hat. You're the GM. You are, to dare I say, God.
Well, you are every NPC, you're every villain, you're everything that the players are not. You're the land, you're the sky, you're the air. You are everything. Doing it and learning that you're doing it is the best way to learn. You can read all of the stuff that I write, you can read all of the stuff that everyone writes about how to start, but I guarantee you, the minute that you actually start playing a game, you're going to come into a situation that you would never be prepared for. And you'll learn the answer just by doing it.
Yeah, and I think there's sometimes some confusion the first time pen and papers, and I'll just say it even though people are like, wait, no, that's obvious. The GM's job isn't to kill the players.
Oh yeah, no.
No, it's not like it's not like they're playing a team game where it's the players versus the DM and whatever the DM can make. If it doesn't kill them, the DM loses. No.
Right. It's yeah, it is not DM versus players. While players are more or less drunken psychopaths and they'll do whatever they want whenever they want at the least opportune time that they want to do it, your job is not to kill them. Your job is to make sure they're enjoying themselves. Sometimes killing them makes the story better and makes everyone enjoy themselves more, but not always.
Actually, I do have one instance when you win as a GM. I feel like I win as a GM on Saturday night because Team Hammer's game, they were doing their second adventure, and it was Toxic and his wife Derix. She's the one that does the art for Dice Troop. Hi, Derix, if you're in chat. But I feel like I won because as soon as we ended the game, she literally just like started sending me pictures of drawing inspired by the campaign. And on Facebook this morning, she made a post being like, "Does anyone want to do pen and paper?" And she's like so happy, so excited. I finally got someone hooked, and that's winning as a GM, if you ask me. When you get somebody so excited, they can't wait to do it next week.
That really is it. We should be bringing more people into this hobby. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is the greatest hobby in the world. And I think that it's very, very underutilized. It has a lot of stigma around it. You should be reaching out to people and showing them how great of an experience this is. And in that, you should be making sure they have the most fun they can have.
Right. Definitely. So, any other tips? 2 shots of vodka usually do it for me.
yeah. Drink heavily.
If worst comes to worst and you just can't stop being nervous, knock back a few beers with your friends. If you're at home, you're sitting around the table, order some pizza, knock back a few beers. It's a good time.
And if you're not 21, don't do drugs.
Yes, don't do drugs.
Very
Alcohol is a
important.
drug.
No, it really, what it all comes down to is doing it, right? Find the story you want to tell, whether it's pre-made or not. Write your own story if you really want to. Find the system you want to play in, get your friends together, have fun and do it. That's all you need to do to be a GM.
I just know somebody in chat room says he thinks it's the GM's job to challenge the players. I kind of agree with that. At the same time, it also depends what kind of GM, what kind of players you are. I mean, obviously, you you probably think about challenging a player like from like an actual combat experience. As far as me, my combats are pretty simple. Like I've done maybe like a really good like biting nails, it's so close call type combats, but at the same time, I'm more about story and problem solving. And I guess that's sort of challenging players. Oh, excuse me, in a certain way. But I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's the job of the GM to make sure it's challenging?
Yeah, no, that's the best way to put this ever. It's not, you're, as a GM, you're not the player's friend, right? Yeah, you are not their friend. You are very much everything else in the world, and everything else in the world should be a struggle. It should be a hard challenge. There shouldn't be much hand holding, and that does not mean make it less fun. That simply means give them something to work for. Winning is better when you have to work for it, rather than when it's handed to you. And that's something that a lot of GMs don't understand. It's not so much about making sure everyone succeeds; it's about making sure everyone enjoys themselves.
All right, so kind of spinning to the other part of this topic is performing. What do you have to say about that? If someone's afraid that they're a performer, I love performing. I love getting into characters. I like doing hand gestures. I like, you know, mimicking the attacks when I'm describing the attacks coming down and stuff like that. I very much like to perform.
No, yes, yeah, I've said it before, right? GMing is 30% writing and 70% performance. A lot of it has to do with making the characters alive, making the world alive, making these events more than rolling dice. When it comes right down to it, rolling dice is not fun. Having a dice in your hand and rolling it and looking at a number is not fun. It's all of the attributes behind that. It's waiting for your success or failure. It's realizing what you just accomplished. It's slicing a goblin in half or unlocking the only door you needed to do to make the entire party survive. It is very much about what you're doing, less than the actual action of rolling it. So I think behind that, it's what the dice represents. Thank you. It's very much about how you portray what's going on and making the world alive and getting that immersion. You can read a book and roll dice, right? And and for the most part, if you're not giving yourself a vision of what's going on in that world, you're not giving yourself anything other than dice being rolled.
Yep, that's very true. What else did I want to say? Corruption points. What else were we going to say about this?
I nailed all my topics. I'm good to go.
Oh, you're good to go. All right, so yeah, we're making good time. We're only at 23 minutes now. So shitty PCs. Go.
So, dude, all right, all right.
I'm gonna make a sandwich. I'll be right back.
The absolute worst PCs are rules lawyers. All right, I'm just gonna take this out. Right, rules lawyers are the worst people. If there's a reason that the rule has not gone the way it should go by the book, don't interrupt the game to say it. It's the worst, right? I I very often will not play. I will not play Pathfinder with one of my friends, one of my actual real life friends. I will not play Pathfinder with him because he knows every rule that there is to know for Pathfinder. And I know for a fact that I will come to a situation where I do not want to use, or I will fudge a rule, or I won't want to use a rule, or I'll allow something to just go to make the narrative better. And I know he'll stop me, and I'll just jump across the table and strangle him to death. And I can't do it. I hate rules layers. If you're a player, never do this. It's the worst. Stopping a game to bring up a rule is the absolute worst. Don't do it.
Okay then. Actually, to go back, I just remembered what I wanted to talk about. Very kind of minor thing. When you DM, do you do revealed dice rolls or do you do hidden dice rolls? Like, I mean, as a GM, when we did Skype, I mean, I did the rolls and I keep them hidden, and that's what I do in real life as well. I make the rolls I ask for their stat.
Oh, I love DM screens.
Yeah,
I love them. I'll make them out of whatever I have nearby. I have a screen, but if I like forget it or some reason, I'll put up a folder. I'll use my
yeah,
books. I love hiding my dice rolls.
yep.
Um,
But you let
but
players roll for their own, right?
absolutely right.
Okay.
And I think there's a certain agency that comes behind the dice rolls you hide and the dice rolls you see. Right
Hmm.
when I'm when I'm rolling dice and it's a fight. It's just a normal fight. Like it's you fighting five cockroaches.
Hmm.
I'm gonna roll my dice behind my screen. It doesn't matter what their AC is. It doesn't matter what I'm striking. I will never ever lie to hit a player when I have not hit them.
Right.
Right? That is not something I will do. I will lie that a player has hit something if they're off by like 1 point, but I will never roll a 2 and say I've crit you. That is bad GMing.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, I personally, I always do hidden rolls. I think it adds to a certain suspense to the game. I think it also allows me to control a bit more. Again, I would never lie that I hit a player. Like if an enemy attacks a player, I would never make a bad roll for my NPC and say it hits them. However, there are just some games, and it can really suck for someone, especially if it's their first time. They're just failing all their rolls. Sometimes if they're bad rolls and they just see one more bad roll, I'm like, you know what? I'll give this one to you just because I have that power when I have it, hidden. So,
Now that's an interesting point, right?
mhm.
I think there are roles that everyone should see. You know what I mean? I
Yep,
think that the roles where it's like you're grappling, you're over a cliff, and this is the grapple that'll decide whether or not you live or die. I will roll that directly in the middle of the
yep,
table, right? And
yep.
I'll be like, here it is, like here we go. Everyone like get ready, and everyone hold their breath and all that stuff. And that's the performance aspect of it again, right?
Oh,
I'm
definitely. I do. In all fairness, I do revealed rolls during a pose check. So if it's a player is facing another player, I'll always do revealed rolls. Also, if a player requests that he sees the roll, I'll do it, and that's the simplicity of my rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a trust that comes with this, and you cannot violate your players in that.
Hmm. Yep. All right. So that's just, I guess, one more GM preference. I mean, would you say that there's one way better than the other, or what's better? If there's one.
I don't think there's ever a better way to GM. I don't think that there's one style of GMing that is better than others. And very much, I don't ever want to demagogue people in saying that there's only one way to do this. And if you're not doing it this way, you're wrong. I
Right.
think a lot of people find trepidation and intimidation in playing these games
Hmm.
because of that idea.
Right.
However you play your game is great as long as your players are enjoying it.
Hmm.
That's it.
Yep. That's it. That's all it is in the long run. Secret of DMing is just make sure everyone's having fun.
Yeah, that's it. That's
That's
all
it.
there is to it.
That's it. All right. So back to shitty PCs.
No, no, no more, no more. I could rant forever about this. No, it really comes down to actually, so I'll say this as a quick throwaway. There are problems that need to be taken care of at the table, and there are problems that need to be taken care of outside of the table. And recognizing which is an invaluable asset to a GM. You cannot every time that a player does something out of character or they do something that's you don't think they should be doing play wise, right? Keep that in the game. Don't criticize them as a person. You have to talk to people like they're people all the time. You have to talk to them like they're characters all the time. If you have a problem where a player is making another player feel bad or a player is ruining the experience of the entire group, then you should take it away from the table. But you should not be embarrassing them. You should not bring that up at the table. I'm very, very much about this. I think that any problem can be solved, but should be solved one-on-one. I don't think that calling people out is a good idea.
Right. I actually had a game of Dark Heresy a couple months ago, and that was just really bad. And I really should have thought it more through because there were players with conflicting personalities and stuff like that. And I really should have thought that through. And that game just didn't end well. I pretty much just ended up just packing my stuff and going. Very unfortunate circumstance. I think that was the first time I've ever been so mad that I've left a game before in my entire life.
I'm gonna throw it out there. I really think that it happens to everyone. You get to
Yep.
that point where it like tensions get too high,
Hmm.
and then you don't understand how to stop it, and it just gets to the point where you have to stop the game. and that's the worst. That's the absolute worst. If there's if when you realize that two players are arguing over like motives in a game, and then they stop arguing over motives in a game, and they start arguing because of each other,
Hmm.
as a GM, it's your point to step in.
Right, and sometimes people are just childish, and there's nothing you can do about that. The best thing you can do is just pack up your game, say I don't feel well or something, and just not invite them to the table again. Or if they're both your friends, invite them when as different parties. I'm ever since that game, I'm very very picky on who I have bringing to a table nowadays. So if anyone's living in the Massachusetts area, I would love a third player.
It really I do think that that's important. I think that there's a lot to say there. I think we should come back to this actually. I'd
Yep.
like to talk about this next week.
Yeah. Actually, one more thing I would like to say about that is, again, I don't mean to. I always bash Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay for its terrible system, but they actually had a really cool thing called the Party Tension Meter. They had a party card, and then they had a Party Tension meter. So they would pick like their collaborative group. Like, have you ever played Marvel Ultimate Alliance or any of those Marvel kind of beat 'em up games recently? Like basically, if you were like the Avengers, you would get like a buff. Like if someone was playing as Thor, Iron Man, Captain America, and Hulk at the same time, they would get like a buff. They kind of got to pick that, but then they also had a party tension meter, which the DM could choose to like move up, and basically when it got to a certain point, they would start losing stats because their characters are just screaming and hollering at each other that they're losing a stat. So if my players were arguing, I'd move it up a bit. They start arguing, I move it up a bit. I mentioned, they're like, okay, because we're going to start getting stress and stuff like that. Because stress and fatigue are a stat, and if you double your willpower and stress, your character just hit 0 HP because he's just so stressed out, he blacks out.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
That's really
so
cool.
I'm actually thinking about investing that in Savage Worlds. I mean, obviously, like none of the people are jerks that I play with, but it's an interesting idea to come up with if you have some sort of a stress meter and they start losing stats at a certain point. So yeah. Anything else you want to say about shitty PCs?
No, no, I think we're.
Are,
I'd like
are
to come back to this. The idea of how to deal with tension. I think that's an important topic, and I'd like to really talk about it.
Yeah, that's definitely something we could probably talk about for 20 minutes for 40 minutes. So the final thing I guess we want to talk about is after you have your first game, the after game discussion. It's very very important I think for a growing DMGM.
Hmm.
I mean, what kind of things do you talk about like after the game when you say the campaign's done?
I will consistently leave my games on a cliffhanger. I like getting into my players' heads over the week. I like because my games run on a weekly basis. Let me start with that. And I like the idea that next week they'll be ready to go. They know what they're going for. They know what they're doing. So I like the idea that after the game, right, I will talk to them about like, hey, what did you think of this thing that happened, right? And I'll hear out their ideas and I'll hear out their motivations and their views on things, and then I'll say like, oh man, and I'll like tease it a little bit, like, wouldn't it be terrible if blah blah blah, and I might be completely lying because this is all out of the game. There's nothing to do with factual content, but I love doing that, like that very slow manipulation, that very small tease of keeping your players keeping in their heads. Over the week, I will literally send emails to my players. I'll send text messages to my players. I'll just be like, "Hey, man, wouldn't it be terrible if blah blah blah?" Or yeah,
I do the exact same thing. I'm terrible. But
maybe
it's so much
maybe
fun. It's
yeah.
so much fun when you. It's. I should never have power in the real scenario. Is I guess what we're saying. Um, I.
I think
I.
that,
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I think that the after the game chat, when you're allowed to be out of character, when you're allowed to just have your thoughts on the table and allowed to share them with all the other players, is the best. I think that because you get to have conversations you would not get to have in character, and that will heavily style your motivations for the next game. And as a GM, I love hearing it because I'm going to abuse that knowledge, and it's great. I'm going to use it in the worst ways, and I'm going to make
Oh,
sure the
that's
players are like the most disadvantageous. And that's my style. I like doing that.
yeah. I 110% agree with you there. Like I agree with you harder than I think anything I've ever agreed with you. I think I've agreed with you more on this than let's start a show. So no, definitely, and like I said, I definitely think I think DMs GMs can win, and I think it's like after the game closes, and then they're all just kind of like, "Oh, it's over, really?" kind of thing, and they're just like super excited, they're talking about it, blah blah. You have like that the hour unwinding, when you're bringing stuff back to your car and all that, and they just keep talking about the game, and especially if there was like some sort of like secret motive or something, because you know how sometimes you actually that's actually another thing we should talk about with GMing, but we'll wrap this up first, but just players talking about each other. They might not have seen what or known what the other players know and stuff like that. It's a good feeling, man. I love those after game discussions.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's also a very good time to ask your players what they like, what they didn't like. Especially if I'm GMing with people for the first time. They can say, first thing I always ask is, do you like the hidden roles? Because that's something that's I think I'm the only person I know who does that. But people always say, yeah, that's good. It adds certain suspense to the game that they really enjoy. But definitely a chance to observe. Sometimes they might think things are too difficult, or they want a bit more of a difficult fight, or they want more story or something, or more role playing. It's a good time to observe. So after your first game, definitely interrogate your players and what they like.
Yes, I have nothing to add. That's a great point.
Okay, so another thing that I wanted to do. Have you ever you've definitely come across scenarios where maybe an NPC pulls them aside or the party splits up. How do you actually handle that?
Party splits? Oh,
Because
I can
I'll
talk
tell you
about
what
this.
I
Yeah,
do, and I don't know if this is a bit extreme. I legit have like a second table nearby, and I'll pull them into another room. I'll say, "Bring your character sheet and dice."
wow. No, I've never done that.
Yeah, I do that, and I literally make them completely isolated. And generally, if anyone wants, wow, I almost did my GM out of character thing for a second there, but I always suggest that my players go from smoke breakers to not smoke breakers. That's generally when they split up. What I suggest they do, because then that way it works kind of nicely on that. Because people can go have their cigarettes. I'll go play the scenario, and then when they come back, I can do their scenario type thing. And then because metagaming is a difficult thing. I mean, do you wanna kind of explain what metagaming is? Because that's
Oh, sure. Metagaming is taking knowledge that you would not have in character or in game that has not been introduced to you in the game and using it for benefit in the game. For example, I know that a kobold has 20 HP, and if I hit it and I do 19 damage, I know it only has 1 damage left, so I won't go Nova next turn to try and kill it because I know out of game that a kobold has 20 HP. But in character, I have no idea how much that kobold has left and things like that.
yeah, definitely. So splitting up parties. Don't suggest it for first-time GMers, but
No.
sometimes it's inevitable. How do you handle that?
Man, I every time I've tried to split the party, I just retire that PC. And I don't mean that in an evil way. I mean that in a like if I have a party and they very much have different motivations, I'll try to hone out or reconstruct those motivations. It's very much a what if one character right is going to be evil and the other three, four, whatever characters are not going to be evil, I'll either try to change their mind in the game by various methods, or I'll work with it so much that they end up leaving the party and then coming back. I think group cohesion is very, very important. I also think that trying to run a split game for more than one session is impossible on a GM.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, with my one-off adventures, unless I know that the party's going to be splitting off for a long time, I actually usually have an extra thing set up in like someone's bedroom or something like that. Or again, the smokers will go out and I'll do the scenario or whatever, and then I'll have them sit each other in a room, and it's just kind of funny, just because if something really horrible happens that's going to affect the other people, they're just like, just looking at them, and
Right.
they can't say anything because that's a rule I actually am pretty strict about. If you're not in the same room, you can't talk to the other players. That's
Yeah,
that's one rule I'm kind of strict on.
Yeah, no, I wanna talk about that for a half hour too. That sounds awesome. Just defection and splitting. God, we have so many topics.
I know.
Let's wrap this. We're not talking about being a GM for the first time at all anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we'll wrap up the show. So anything else you have to say for first-time GMers? What are your inspirational words? Come on, I'm gonna roll on your charisma check.
Just do it. Just do it. That's all you got to do, right? Pick up a book, start playing. We need more GMs. We're outnumbered 5-1. Just start playing. Just do it. This hobby is awesome. You can't do it wrong.
All right. What's your charisma?
Oh man, I'm gonna give myself a 16 if I'm being right.
You failed the speech, so none of you want to be GMs. I'm
Ah,
afraid. You rolled like a 2.
ah.
Okay, so no, I have nothing to add. I mean, being the GM is a really unique thing. If you're a writer and you love your stories and you want to share it with players, just do it. You're with friends, probably. You're not going to be going to a game. If people are having fun, work on that. If people don't seem to like something, steer away from that. Don't be intimidated by the books with lots and lots of words and numbers. Just don't do that.
Right.
So that'll be it. So what are we going to talk about next week? Do you think?
I don't know. I'd like to talk about how to handle players now. I think we can roll it all into one: defections, party splits, and tensions at the table.
All right, so just talk about solving problems as a GM.
Yes. Yeah.
Advanced to GMing. We should call
Yeah.
it.
Jamming 102.
Yep. All right. So, you know what? Let me post a link to Dice Troop's blog. I would love to get messages saying what you guys want us to talk about. You guys, the chat room, are the ones who support us. You want to hear us talk about something and you like our show? Feel free to send us another topic. Oh, wait, I don't think that's the correct one. I think that's my link to Dice Troop. Oops. Don't click that one. Click this one instead.
Also, guys, and I know that 90% of you follow me anyway, if you ever have questions about specific systems, specific questions about games, feel free to send me a question.
Yep, and just to let everyone know, Dice Troop is a non-profit organization. We run everything on donations. I personally put a lot of money and time into this, and any donations at the bottom of our Tumblr blog, you can donate to us $1, $2, $5, anything that you can donate just to help us going would be greatly appreciated. Still, we'll always provide the shows for free, but anything that will help me just a little bit. So, yeah, you all have a wonderful Monday.
See you later, guys.